lecture we are going to be discussing language. So basically language, we say, is the key element to our cognitive processes. It has to do with the way we think, the way we transmit culture, memory, our emotional intelligence, emotions, intelligence, communication, and just all those things that go on inside our head that make us human. A lot of that is transmitted through language, right? And then of course the way we communicate with each other is largely through verbal communication. So we define language as being an arbitrary system of communication that's basically just based on symbols and signs. And so it's just a way for us to create meaning to these sounds that come out of our mouth. And basically that's what language is. Language is the actual, it's just putting a symbol to a sound that we make, and the meaning comes in because those symbols then represent something that either tell us something or provide us with those rules on how to engage each other. So we say that language has two functions, and that is to transmit and share information, and it also has social and emotional functions because we express our thoughts and our behaviors with language. For the most part, of course, we have nonverbal communication too, but for the majority of us, we do use verbal communication. So it's a way to share information about what's going on in our life, experiences that we have, and then it's also that way to share about what goes on in our inner worlds too. And then because we are social creatures, we need language to help us with maintaining our relationships, establishing those relationships, cultivating those relationships. And so because of that, we know that language is something that is learned, and of course we know that because we see how babies are able to start speaking. We know that we are able to learn other languages if we study them. We also say that language is reflective, and it's reflective in the sense that once again, we can kind of share that information inside our heads, and it's reflective in the sense that we can mimic each other, we can depict each other. It's reflective because we can talk about the past, we can talk about the present, we can talk about the future, and because we have creativity and imaginations, language allows us to even make up stuff. So, because with language, we're able to make up all sorts of different worlds and scenarios and just all sorts of things there. And so when we look at how language has evolved since the first humans began speaking, our prehistoric ancestors there, many thousands of years ago, what we're really seeing is that it seems that our brains and our cognitive abilities, they seem to evolve as our ability to produce language evolved too. Give me just a second here. There we go. So language is learned, language is reflective, language is also generative, and it just goes back to that idea that, we hear something, we see something, we think something, and we're able to reproduce that with our words. And so even if you go into a bookstore and you see a book that you have never read in your life, as long as it's in your language, your native language, you know that when you pick it up and read a sentence that you're going to understand what it says, right? Language is also generative in the sense that it can change from generation to generation. It can die out. We can have new languages that emerge. So all of that's kind of generative process there. Alright, and so when it comes to looking at how exactly we get this ability to be able to speak, because that's something that kind of sets us apart from other species. We know other species communicate, but it's the language thing that I think we get stuck on because, for us, communicating, we wrote it down. We wrote it down and have those symbols for what once again, those sounds coming out of our mouths mean. And as far as we know, there aren't any animals that have actually, symbolize those sounds that they make when they communicate. But we do have plenty of studies to show that animals do communicate with each other, and they do have like specific sounds that they use, to identify, I say, like their other pack mates, or like their partner, to identify who the enemy is. So cool stuff there. Hyenas have a very complicated kind of communication system. Cool stuff. So when looking at how we acquire the ability to speak and have language, we have some different accounts there. So Noam Chomsky says that we have this specific organ in our brain that's the language acquisition device, and so that's pretty much this little area in our brain that houses all those rules of language. And technically, from the Nevitist account, we say that we do come into this world knowing how language works. And studies do show that while still in utero in the room, that babies can hear. We're not quite sure of the cognitive processes that go on at that stage, at those stages. But we know that in the womb, babies have some awareness or sensory perception of their surroundings. So it's possible that, they hear in their little brains as they're forming, or kind of, making sense of those noises they hear. So it's possible that we have a specific part of our brain that does do that. However, critics point out that, when it comes to understanding, we may be born knowing how, with maybe some sense of knowing how to speak because we hear it, and so we're kind of conditioned to it, right? But it doesn't seem like, as far as those rules of language go, that those are something that we indeed have to be taught. We have to learn those rules before we're able to, truly speak in those grammatically correct ways, and then, write in those grammatically correct ways. And we all know that that's a process. We've all been through the process of learning to read and write. So from the theoretical accounts there, we have the pure nature and nurture accounts. So because of the fact that language is generative, and in many ways it's infinite, because as long as we have the language and we have those words, we can combine them any way that we want. And so basically what we're saying there is, so it's kind of like we are kind of born with that ability, but it's something that's nurtured through our social interaction. So, to truly understand what we're saying, and then, be able to write that down and convey it to each other, it's something that, we're conditioned, we're ingrained to do. And then next we have the social pragmatic account. And basically with this theory, we're saying that language, it's a practical thing, because we're social creatures, we need each other to survive, and because we verbally communicate, that children kind of infer, what things mean, just based on, those social interactions, based on the context of the situation. In some ways, that's how we learn those emotional expressions too. It's just kind of inferring to what's going on around you. So language is kind of the same way. And I would say that's even the same if you go to a country that another country that doesn't speak your language. Even if you don't have any idea of the language, you could kind of start to make a little bit of sense out of what's being said. And, body language has a lot to do with that. When I worked with the Lakota, they like to, speak in their own native tongue. And that was fine. I liked listening to it, even though I didn't understand a lot of it. After a while, I started to recognize certain words and certain statements and the certain ways that they would gesture when they said something. So I was able to start piecing together what was being said. And that's something that we are able to do. That's something that you can do when you go into a different environment. Of course, though, the older we get, the harder it is for us to kind of process the language, so it's a little bit harder to learn different languages. But once again, it's just, picking up on being aware of what's going on around you says a lot for no pun intended, but for what is being said. And then, like I said, we have that body language too, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. Last, we have the general cognitive processing theory. And basically, it's just that, our abilities to perceive and recognize patterns in nature. I mean, that is something that it seems like is kind of an innate thing in us. And just, by being able to recognize those patterns and being able to perceive the world around us, that it's just those skills kind of then get translated into language there. So it's a little bit like, I want to say, like, kind of fine motor skills and then motor skills too. Just think about all the different muscles involved just in your mouth and your tongue and your cheek and your jaw and your lips, all of those muscles that work together so that we can actually produce sounds with our mouth. And once again, those are like automatic nervous system functions. So we're not really aware of all the different senses and muscles and nerves and all that good stuff that's using. But anyway, all right. So we say that language is a highly practiced and automatic cognitive process. And once again, because we are born into a world where people speak, it does kind of become a little bit part of our inner dialogue. I'm trying to think, I wonder if that's true for people who are deaf or people who are mute. I'm not really sure on that. But we do say that, it's just kind of this automatic part of our thinking process. And so when it comes to language, we have these four, we can call them ingredients, aspects, levels of analysis that all work together. So when it comes to language, these four specific factors are always playing a role, and they're always interacting with each other. So those four factors are phonemes, morphemes, syntax, and extra-linguistic information. A phoneme, so if we think of putting language together like we're preparing a meal, our phonemes would be the different ingredients in those meals. So those are the sounds of the language. So when you think of different words and think of those different, or think back to phonetics when you first learned how to talk or first learned how to read, and you'd see the card A equals apple, and this is sound it out. A for A, B, B, bat, or think of Sesame Street. They do that a lot on Sesame Street, right? So those are the ingredients that make up those different sounds, so that we get those different words. And so think of like the ooh sound that we use for moon or screw. And even though a screw is something different from moon, that sound, when we spell it differently, that it's the sound that we're talking about. So it's that ooh sound. That's the phoneme, okay? And we say that in all of language total. Pretty broad statement there, right? Pretty pompous to say we know this for a fact, but we say there are probably about 100 phonemes in total as far as all languages go. With English, we have between about 40, 45. We see some languages that have less than that, maybe even just 15. Others have 60 or more. Some languages have those overlapping phonemes, and some languages, they have sounds that they don't occur in other languages, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute here too. Alright, so next we have the morphemes, and so basically these are the smallest units of speech that are meaningful. So basically we could say, so if the phonemes are the ingredients to the meal, the morphemes are kind of like the menu items. So those are what you're going to check off to note what you want, right? And it's all based on the context of the words. So you have to think how we make words plural, we can make them singular, make them possessive. Words can represent past tense, future tense, present tense, and it just depends on the context of that information that we're conveying. So think of the word like play and the different ways that you can play on that word, right? Past tense, you say he played the guitar. Present, he's playing the guitar. Future tense, he will be playing the guitar. Or, to say in general, well, yeah, so-and-so, he plays the guitar. So the morphing there, it's just, once again, it's the different ways that we're changing the word play around to fit the context of the situation. And basically what it is we're conveying that information about the semantics, okay? And semantics is just that. Semantics means words, it's written words. And so once again, it's just the context of those words, the meaning of those words. Alright, and so when we get to the syntax, so this is now where, you picked out your menu item, and so now you're going back in the kitchen, and you're going to take all those ingredients, and you're going to put it all together to make that meal, right? That's kind of what your syntax is. That's putting the meal together. And syntax, we say it's kind of the rules of how you go about writing and structuring your sentences there. And so basically that's what syntax is. Syntax just means sentence structure. We have to write and say words in an order that makes sense, right? You can't say dog ran the or ran dog the, right? I mean, we can infer what they're saying, but that's not some syntactically correct way to say that sentence, right? The correct way to say it is the dog ran. So that's what we're talking about with syntax there. Syntax is based on what we call morphological markers, and that's just, kind of like those morphemes. It's those elements that modify those words and add sounds to them that change their meaning. So, the dog ran, the dog is running, the dog will run. Those are kind of those, what we're talking about there is those morphological markers. And then what I told you with the sentence structure there. So syntax is really something more that we apply to writing, especially in academia. We always want to follow those academic rules of writing because it's a little different from other ways that we write, and it's a lot different from the way that we talk. So we know that in the real world, when we speak, our language don't follow those syntactical rules as perfectly as we want them to when we are writing our ideas down. So basically, that syntax, once again, the way we structure our sentences, it's just kind of an idealized form of language. So, I mean, idealized, and that's the concept that has been imagined of how we put those words together in particular orders to do that, so that we know that when we do speak to each other that we are not just talking nonsensical stuff is basically what that's talking about there. Alright, so now that we've got our ingredients all together, our meal is done, and we're ready for that. We're ready to eat it, ready to take in just the whole dining experience there. And so that's that extra linguistical information. And that is that information in the language that we infer, that we're interpreting. So that would probably be like those emotional inflections. It would be like, relating what's being said to us to something else we know, something else we experience. It's just that. It's that extra interpretation and inference that we do, and that helps us to, be able to communicate with each other. And of course, once again, body language plays a role in that too. And so then when we look at language, we have these things called dialects. And basically a dialect is when you speak the same language, but it's a variation. So, people have accents, or they say words a certain way, a colloquialism, all right? So it's language dialects. You can look at that as kind of it's kind of like the dining experience again. Those dialects are just those cultural difference and dining habits. So, all cultures, all areas of the world, all groups, we all have specific ingredients and ways that we put our meals together. We have different ways we prepare those meals, and then we have different ways that we experience and share and enjoy those meals, right? So that's basically what dialect is. It's just those little subtle nuances and those differences there. And think of the United States. We have the northern accent, so those New England accents where it says they park the car and the star, talk like that. Very, very distinct dialectic enunciations there that is unique to people up in the Northeast and the Eastern U.S., right? And then you say down in the South, and you have that Southern accent. People say y'all, and they say ain't and fixin' and over yonder, and then, those are their little colloquial words that they use. And then you get to the Midwest, and you kind of have that Midwestern accent. You get out, to California and the West Coast there, the Pacific accent. So, you go to different, Texas, they have their own little unique Southern accent there. You go to Louisiana, the Cajuns, they have their own unique accents and way of saying things. So just, wherever we go in the United States, not everybody is always going to speak exactly the same way, but for the most part, we're all speaking English, right? Or we should all be speaking English. And so, we have those understandings. And when we look at different cultures, we see that too. So say, people in Germany have, they speak German, they all speak the Germanic language, but depending on which town you're in, especially, out in the country, what little country town you're in, everybody's going to have their little colloquial way of saying things. If you've ever taken high school Spanish and then actually gone and integrate yourself into a real Hispanic community, you see that the way you were taught in high school to speak is not quite like just the normal street way to speak. So there's always going to be those little versions in that dialect. And sometimes that's what leads to prejudice and stereotype. So we just want to be careful of that. Just because someone speaks a little bit differently than us, it doesn't mean anything negative about them or about us. It just is showing the diversity of what it means to be human. And then we also say, too, that sometimes the prejudice that comes in when you hear people speaking with different dialects or even just speaking in accents, because let's say that English is not their native language, it's their second language. We tend to be prejudiced and think, oh, learn English, you don't know how to speak English. And it's not that, it's just that, it comes down to syntax. Sometimes, the way people are taught to speak English in other parts of the world, a little bit different from here in America. I would say a lot of time it's based on more British English too, or at least that's what I see more with students writing. And so, we tend to say, oh, you don't know how to speak English. And it's like, no, they've learned it differently. And then we have to realize, too, that when people have a native language and then they have to learn to speak with another language, that, there's some translation, because your brain's telling it to you in your native language and then translating it back in that new foreign language. And so, just once again, just a way to show that diversity of what it means to be human. And even those of us that think we speak proper English don't always get it right all the time, right, guys? So when it comes to language in the brain, we do have specific areas that we know relate to language and speech. It seems like when it comes to things like phonetics, phonology, syntax, semantics, those seem to be more functions of the left hemisphere, whereas metaphors, things like abstract thinking, understanding humor, those seem to me more in the right hemisphere of our brain. So once again, it shows how those different functions work together. Nobody is truly just one-sided as far as their brain goes. Nobody is just truly ever just uses all of the left side of the brain or all the right side of the brain. Those hemispheres work in conjunction with each other. Interestingly, though, when we look at the difference between left-handed and right-handed people, we see that with the majority of us that are right-handed, that language is more in those left hemispheres, where it seems that left-handed people, they have some of that in both. They have that ability in both of their hemispheres there. So interesting stuff. And the reasons we know about these areas of our brain that relate to speech and language have to do with doing kind of not like experiments, like torturous experiments, but just doing work, case studies and experiments with people who've had some sort of brain trauma or brain injury, and then noting where that damage was in the brain and then how that affected their powers of speech and language. And so even as back as the early 1900s, scientists were noting that when damage was done to the left hemisphere, that people would lose their ability to speech and even just, produce language in any form. And then it looked like those who just had injuries to the right hemisphere, that they didn't really lose those abilities. So interesting work there. And then, as we know, our brain works on those electrochemical reactions, so those neural pathways or little synapses going all over our body, up and down our central nervous system, and telling our brain what's going on, and our brains, then telling the rest of our body what to do and what's going on. And so, so we know that when certain things are going on in our brain, we see different areas light up, right? We see those electrical impulses. We know this with things like depression, schizophrenia. If you look at CAT scans, you can see different areas lit up in what we call normal brains as compared to schizophrenic or depressed brains. And and it's all based on those neurons firing there, right? And so so we know then with looking at parts of the brains related to speech, we have this thing called cortical stimulation mapping. And it's just that. It's just kind of, something you put on the brain that kind of has, it has little sensors on it that will kind of match those neurons that are going on in your brain. And so as they're kind of like stimulating, moving this thing around your brain, and or giving you different tasks to do, like maybe say look at that, or read this, listen to this, whatever. They're looking for the brain activity. They're looking to see what parts of your brain are lighting up, right? And so specifically with the cortical stimulation mapping, it is related to speech. So it's going to be something that has to do with language or speech, that they're asking you questions and then look and see what parts of the what areas of the brain are lighting up there. Really helpful for treating epilepsy, helps remove tumors, and some really cool stuff that goes on there. And so basically, it can help us when we identify those sites that have been damaged. There might be a way to, maybe kind of find a way to repair them. And we're certainly getting close to those kind of things. Sorry, guys, I don't know why my thing never wants to change on me. There we go. Alright, so like we said, we know that our brain works along those neural pathways. We know that the more of those pathways that we use, that the stronger they become. We know that if we don't use them, they tend to get pruned and maybe eventually cut to the point that they don't exist anymore. And so, our ability to process language and speech works along those neural pathways too. And, interesting, like we said, Noam Chomsky may have been on to something there. There is something in our DNA, our genetics, that is encoded to give us the ability to speak, right? And so when it comes to actually looking at specific areas of the brain that we know are responsible for speech and language, we have the visual cortex, auditory cortex, the Wernicke's area, and the Broca area. So because being human means that we're we're constantly bombarded by outside stimulation, right? And so our vision has a big plays a big role in that. You know, we're very visual creatures. A lot of what we know is pretty much based upon what we see, and so that all plays a role then in with language. You know, that visual cortex is you know, us seeing, you know, the light being interpreted in our brain, and then, you know, that gets interpreted into language and speech there. Auditory cortex, so it's the same thing there. Not only are we visual creatures, but we're auditory creatures too. We have those 5 senses, right? And those 5 senses all work together to make us human, and they all play a role, you know, in our ability to communicate with each other. So that's just the same thing there as far as with visual. With the auditory cortex, you know, we're hearing that information, and then, you know, our brain then translates that into some kind of speech language, right? The Wernicke's area, it is involved in both spoken and written language. Excuse me. And basically, with the Wernicke's, we're looking at pronunciation, so you know, really related to all those little muscles and neurons and nerves and senses that make up the bottom part of our faces and our mouths and all that involved to help us be able to speak. Sorry guys. The Broca area, that is actually related to our production of speech. So same thing. So how we pronounce the speech is just as important to being able to, you know, get all the parts of you know, our bodies that are used for speech to be able to make it happen. You know, so they work together. If you have damage in one of those areas, it does tend to affect the other there. All right. So when it comes to learning, we say that you know, children are usually less efficient at learning tasks than adults. However, when it comes to language, that's not quite the case. Children actually seem to be more adept and more efficient at learning languages than adults do. Excuse me, allergies. And basically what it is that, you know, when we're little kids and our brains don't start developing until we're like in our early 30s there. So when we're infants and when we're in young childhood, infancy, toddlerdom, kind of like kindergarten ages, you know, young children there, our brains are rapidly developing, and they still have a lot of space in them. You know, as we get older and our brains develop, they also get filled up with a bunch of other information, right? So in my estimate, it would be that's kind of why children are able to learn language more efficiently. It's just they have more room in their brain for it, basically. So when it comes to you know, how children go about learning and actually reproducing language, we know that it's a stage process, right? What do babies do? They come out and they cry. That's the only way really that they can communicate. And then they start kind of learning some of those emotional responses like smiling. So they learn if they smile, they'll get an attention. And then, you know, based on those crying, based on those smiles, the way that people are reacting to them, you know, they're hearing words being spoken to them. And so then they start trying to imitate those sounds. So you have those babbling kind of noises that come out first, right? And then as you know, as we develop and we increase in age, then we get greater control over our vocal cords, so that babbling actually starts turning into significant speech, right? And we can actually then start saying words, right? And we say that by age 10 months that phonemes are similar to adult speakers of native languages. So just, we're able to say words like other people say them, which is pretty much what that means there. And we know that when it comes to learning words that you have to comprehend what the word is before you can reproduce it. So it seems like, I guess an example would be like dad. Babies usually learn mom or dad first, right? It'd be like dad. You have to kind of point at dad first, and dad, and then finally baby goes, dad, right? Or, maybe baby will look at mom and go, dad, or look at other people and call them dad, but it's part of that schema thing that Piaget talks about. It's just learning, well, that looks like dad, but dad is this schema, and that, anyway, we have to have some understanding of what we're talking about before we actually can say the words and then start using them. So we say about 9 to 10 months, babies start to understand words around them. From 10 to 12, babies will start to speak. And then by 2, we say that babies, toddlers, that they know hundreds of words. And then by about 2, they can actually start putting it together and kind of correct syntax and say 2 like little simple phrases. So, more juice, I love you, just, simple things there. Alright, and so once again, like I said, since, it seems like babies, little children, toddlers, their brains are rapidly developing, so, they have more, kind of more space in there to learn things, so it's real easy for little kids to pick up on a different language and become bilingual. However, or even multilingual, where you learn more than 2 languages. Bilingual is 2 languages. Multilingual would be 3 or more, right? And so, typically with bilingual children, we see that one language is more dominant than the other. When it comes to just people who speak one language, people who speak multiple language, they have a little bit of trouble with getting their sentence structures in each language. And it's like I just said earlier, it's because their brains are working double time because they're having to translate from the different languages, and in that translation, their brain then has to remember every single thing about those language rules, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Even for those of us when we just have one language and one voice in our heads, sometimes getting our thoughts into words is not always easy, right, guys? But what we do say is so what we say is that, so we see that bilingual, so we have this delay in syntactical development, but then at the same time, they seem to have like a heightened awareness. It's like once they get it, then they have a really good understanding of what those rules are, and it just relates to how early you use that. And so we say that if it's learned early enough, then we're seeing the same parts of the brain being used for both of those languages. And we just say between 1 and 7 years that children, they can develop those language abilities of the native speakers. After age 7, that kind of starts to decrease. And we say that maybe better language learners do the less is more hypothesis, which is that's what I keep referring to. Is just they just have less information going on in their brain to be able to soak that up. And we know that for the most part, any culture, language is a pretty natural and gradual process. And like we say, it's something that we need both nature and nurture to be a part of. And we have examples of children who don't have, who are kind of, that we say, language deprived. And so it would be something like a feral children. Jeannie is a good example of not so much a feral child, but a child that was so severely neglected that she really was not a functioning human being. She was she had been pretty much chained to a bed her whole life, locked in a room that would, had no sunlight. Nobody ever talked to her. Nobody ever gave her any affection whatsoever. When child services finally found her, she was like 13 years old, but she was the size of a 2-year-old. She still wore diapers. I mean, she had to be taught. I don't even think at 13 she should have already hit puberty, didn't even have her period. I mean, just severely deprived and severely abused little girl. And so she was taken away. And I do believe that, like I said, that was back in the 70s. And if memory serves me right, I'm pretty sure that she ended up, like, being okay. Like, she's okay. I'm not sure if she's still alive today. I would have to look into that. But that would be an example. Or like feral children. We do have these stories of children who have been found raised out in the woods by wolves. Or there's stories of children being raised in cities by dogs. There's one of a girl up in Russia. And what we see is that, those kids, they can't speak. They don't know how to talk at all. And they have to be, they have to be trained and relearned. And for the most part, in most cases, as the feral children we've had, they have been successfully taught how to be human and integrated in society. But then there are a few that we don't have, like the Jungle Book, the story about Mowgli by Rudyard Kipling. He was actually based on a real life story of this wild child, feral child that they had found. I think that was the one, the kid was named Victor, and they did find him like out in the woods being raised, running with a pack of wolves or something. And but I believe that little boy ended up like running away again. There we go. Every time. Alright, so we're talking about sign language this week. And sign language is just a form of communication for members of the deaf community. We also have Braille, which is a form of language and communication for the blind community. So, a sign language is actually, it's pretty cool and pretty interesting, and there are some myths about it. We think that just because somebody is born without the ability to hear, somebody is born deaf, that they don't need sign language. We think that everybody's deaf, they can read lips. Not necessarily the case. Even skilled lip readers, we say, they can only do it for a minority of the time. And then we also say that for kids who are deaf, that if they learn sign language, that they'll never be able to learn to speak. And that's a misconception too. Many people who are deaf, they will use sign to communicate, but they can also speak too. They will talk, and they just use that ability too. And we say that, those who do sign seem to make faster progress in speaking. And I'm going to tell you guys, it goes back to, once again, those fine motor skills. Something about, using our hands. There's something in our brain to where it seems like our hands and our mouths are very in tangent with each other. And so one of the most common misconceptions of sign language is that we think it's based off of English. So we think that sign language, it's a word for word translation, and it's not. It really has this different set of rules that it follows. And interestingly, American Sign Language was adapted from the Lakota, because of the Lakota Indians, like I said a few minutes ago, when they talk, they do use a lot. I just use my hands a lot when I talk, but the Lakota actually have specific signs that they use when they say words, and I can't remember how, but it was through some anthropologist, sewing that and realized, oh, well, we can use this for deaf community, long time ago that happened. And but just interesting to note there. There we go. All right. right, so when it comes to communication, just as much as we have the ability to produce language and sound and make that meaningful with our mouths and voices, we also have non-verbal communication, and that plays a really big role in how we interact with each other. And when it comes to communicating, even though we have this great ability called language, really listening is the main thing, and that's the key to language and communicating and getting along with others. It's our ability to listen. There's a saying that says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we listen more and talk less. And I think that is a very true point. The less we learn to speak, the more we can deal with conflict in our lives, and in many ways the way we learn to speak in more meaningful ways there. So we know that language affects us emotionally. It reflects social constructs, so things like gender roles, gender terms, represents a little bit of things like identity. We said it's that cultural transmission, so language helps us know our traditions, our heritage, and then a lot of what we say to each other does come in the form of body language. So when it comes to body language, we have these 5 basic principles, and pretty much even though we have body language, our body language may not always convey what we're trying to say. So instead of doing that brash emotional jump and being like, well, you have your hands crossed across your chest and a scowl on your face, you must be angry at me. Instead of making those assumptions, we have to keep, if we follow these 5 general rules here, we can kind of hone our skills and help us be, better communicators, because we're understanding how to pick up on those non-verbal cues. So firstly, culture, age, gender, geographic location all play a role in nonverbal communication. Sometimes gesturing is a way we make movements with our hands or our feet. They mean different things in different cultures. So you think like a wave for us is hi. Giving someone the bird is kind of universal. I'm trying to think if there's one like you use like those like cowboy hands, or just certain little hand gestures like that. I know, like I said, there's one for like the Texas Longhorns or something. It's something like that. Or maybe I'm doing a gang sign, I'm not really sure. But those are all, you guys know what I'm talking about. Those are all gestures that we use, and sometimes they don't mean the same thing. My memory is failing me on giving you a cross-cultural example. But the only one I can think of is like showing somebody the bottom of your foot over in certain Middle Eastern cultures is considered like giving somebody the bird in our culture. Or like I said, there are certain ways you wave your hands that may seem benign to our culture, but if you go to maybe like an Eastern culture, it's not proper etiquette to move your body in those certain ways. So it's always important that you're looking at your audience and where you're at when you're looking at those nonverbal cues. And so to go with that, you want to put things into context, and you do that by looking for a combination of signals, right? So like I said, just because somebody may have their arms crossed and they kind of have a little scowl on their face, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're angry or they're mad at you. I've been told pretty much all 40 years of my life that when people will come up and be like, what's wrong with you? Your face, what's wrong with your face? Why are you angry? And I'm like, and it's usually when I'm deeply concentrating on something and I'm really absorbed and fixed on what I'm saying. I guess I tend to make an angry face when I do that. And so it's like, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at anything, So those are the things that, put it into context, Or just because somebody may be standing there with their hands on their hip, that's usually a kind of a pretty defensive, a kind of aggressive stance we take with each other too. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody wants to be aggressive with you, right? You know, it's the context, what's going on that's creating that body language. And so that's where you want to look for those combination of cues. And sometimes, you know, people, their body language will give them away. Like, for instance, if you're lying, sometimes, you know, people will blink when they lie, or they'll turn their eyes away. My dad was a big one. Whenever my dad was lying, he would look up to the ceiling. I mean, no fail, he would just look up to the ceiling. Very easy to catch him on. My husband, when he lies, he gets a certain sound in his voice that his voice changes octaves, and it's very easy to tell when he's lying. Which, me too, when I'm lying, my voice changes octaves, and we can pick up on those kind of things with each other. So, and sometimes, you know, you got to think that sometimes the way somebody is speaking, maybe their tone of voice, or maybe they'll look away when they say something, and you know, it's not really what they're thinking. So maybe, like, say if somebody is upset or in a bad mood, and you're like, "Oh, hey Jill, how are you doing today?" And she's like, "Oh, great, everything's fine." And kind of like, "You don't seem like everything's fine." Right, you know, so you're just looking to see, and then maybe you say, like, "You don't seem like everything's fine." Just kind of like, "No, it really is fine. I'm just tired." And you're like, "Oh, okay, well that explains it." You know, once again, I tend to think that a lot of times with body language, we tend to want to pick up on it as something negative, especially if you're going to get into conflict or a fight with somebody else. And you know, just a lot of time the way you're moving your body will dictate how things are going to move forward in that interaction, right? And a lot of times it's we can only change how we're going to react in those situations. And when you change how you react, it can really just take the steam out of that situation. And then we also want to look at incongruency, and that's just like I said, you know, if you ask Jill, "What's wrong?" She's kind of, "I don't know." You know, we see those discrepancies and how somebody's body language is acting compared to, you know, maybe what they're really saying to us. And, you know, like I said, it can be sometimes that is kind of something negative going on, and then, you know, sometimes it's just not. Sometimes it's not, you know, not everything. As humans, we like to think that everything is always about us. Even when we go to interact with other people, we like to think that we're the center of the world. And it's just that, it's incongruency. Sometimes it's just not. Sometimes people are just mad and then it has nothing to do with us at all, you know, or sometimes, whatever. It's, you know, all about putting it all into context and actually reading the situation and reading the person you're with. And then, lastly, trust your intuition. Trust your gut instinct. You know, what is your gut telling you about the situation, about that individual? And for the most part, your gut's going to be right about it. So, you know, sometimes there are those people, you get around and you just get that feeling of, "I'm not safe, something bad's going to happen," right? And so you change what you're doing. Or sometimes you get in a situation and you see somebody and you're automatically like, "Oh, I'm going to like them, I can just tell," right? You know, it's all about trusting your intuition. And you know, the more that we're able to trust our intuition, the more it helps us with our senses and being able to, you know, make sense of all that stimulus that's coming into us, especially when it comes into context of interacting with other individuals. Because as much as we are social creatures, everything's not unicorn and rainbows, right, guys? So, you know, we do have conflicts and challenges in life, and it just comes down to, you know, learning how to navigate those and overcome those and make those into positive and productive things. All right. So when it comes to looking for nonverbal cues, we have 7 areas of the body that we usually look to: the face, the eyes, the hands, gesture, posture, position of the head, proximity, and then feet and legs. And just once again, you know, maybe we don't always say what we mean. Sometimes there's some ambiguity, and that's just, you know, once again, just, you know, all about not focusing on one thing, taking it all into context, holistic, I guess is what I'm saying. It's a holistic approach and looking at everything. Alright, so when it comes to animals, as I said at the beginning, we're not really sure if animals actually have symbols, that they, the sounds that they make, and who has sat down in the animal kingdom and wrote those out. Probably nobody, right? So, but when it comes to, people just in public and even in the scientific community, it seems like a large number of people, we do believe that animals have an ability to communicate, and that the sounds and the different body movements that they make is indeed a type of language, right? We know that animals communicate with scent, they communicate with visual displays, and then they also have vocalization. Usually we see mating season is when animals get very communicative. Aggression is another one. I have two roosters. I have a rooster, and then one of the babies ended up being a rooster, and they get a little aggressive with each other. So they're definitely very vocal when the old rooster wants that little baby rooster away from the other ones. They don't hurt each other, but they're what is it? Their bark is worse than their bite, really. They just kind of, buck up and make noises and puff themselves all up. It's kind of funny. Honeybees actually communicate. They have this specific little dance that they do, and it's a way to communicate information to the rest of the hive as to where, that pollen is for making the honey. We know that dolphins have communication, whales have types of communication. They, supposedly in the next 10 years, scientists are actually going to symbolize dolphin language. It's like they think that they're on track to unlocking dolphin language, that we're actually be able to write it down, make it symbolic, and then understand what they're saying. Pretty interesting. Birds, parrots, and other, I'm not sure what order that would be, but all the parrot, cockatiels, macaws, all those different types of birds like that, they are very big on vocalizing, so they can learn to speak English, and a lot of parrots and stuff are pretty cool. I mean, they can live to be 40, 60, 80 years old, and and because they live so long, and because they're so smart, you have to keep their mind stimulated. That's when you see birds that pick their feathers off. It's just because they're just bored. There's no mental stimulation going on. Birds need that. And so we know that birds can be taught to speak, and we say it's only through a process of repetition. But what's repetition except for maybe the most primitive way of associating something, right? Because if someone repeats it to you enough, you're eventually going to associate that you say that too, right? We know that chimpanzees have languages. We know that, pretty much all of the non-human primates, and then the even lower simians, so monkeys, those are the lower ones, down to tarsiers, they have forms of communication. We know that with bonobo monkeys, that they have the way that they go about learning more closely resembles us than any of the other, say, non-human primates there. A lot of times animals learn through observation, rather than reinforcement, although we know with Skinner and operant conditioning that, or Pavlov and classical conditioning, that animals can be taught associative learning too. And it's pretty cool because bonobos, we do see that they use some kind of symbolism in their social interaction, and they can seem to learn language, but they get stuck in syntax. So it's like they can learn maybe what dog is and what ran is, but to put that together and say the dog ran, they get a little confused on that. Gorillas are really super smart. They are really good at learning sign language. There was one famous, well, when I grew up, she's dead now, but as a child growing up, Jane Goodall was one of my favorites. Her and the Leakeys are why I got into these fields of studying humans in the first place. But there was a famous gorilla. Her name was Coco. She was the first gorilla that they taught sign language to, and she was an extremely smart animal. She knew something like, I'm going to butcher it. I want to say at least 200 signs. I mean, she was very proficient in communicating, and they even got her a baby kitten at one time. It was just a little orphan kitten that they gave to this gorilla, and she loved that little kitten. She took care of it like it was her own. Something happened, and that baby kitten ended up getting out of the facility and got ran over. And so when they told Coco that the kitten had died, she understood what they said, and she actually cried and was actually upset and was talking about her little kitten that died. And then there was one time before he passed away, Robin Williams went and met Coco, and it was so cool because she knew who he was. She kind of kept pointing to the TV and making the sign for smile or something, and we kept calling him, oh, the funny man from TV is what she kept calling him. So pretty interesting stuff there when it gets to animal communication. Locked up again. Ha 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 ha. Alright, so in order to have more effective communication, we've got 3 principles here, and then we have 5 steps here. So effective communication comes when you give others your attention and respect. In Buddhism, we call that kind of deep listening, deep speaking. It means that, you really mean what you say. Take the time to think about it. And, just mean what you say. Once again, don't act on those brash, first emotional instincts of, well, I know everything and I know what's right, so I know exactly what's in your head too. Give that space for other people to, process what's going on in their head and be able to respond back to you. So, a lot of that does come into, focusing on the other person. A lot of times when we go to have conversations with people, we don't do what the Buddhists call, we don't do that authentic speaking, authentic listening. We don't have authentic conversations because we're too busy in here thinking about what we're going to say next. So we're not really listening to what the other person says, right? Think about how many times you've maybe found yourself at discourse with somebody because you just heard one part of a sentence and not the rest of it, and so that totally changed what was being said, right? So, listen to what the other person is saying. Listen to what's being said, and then allow your brain to say, okay, brain, shut up. Let's listen to what they say before you respond. Listen to what's being said first, because you don't know what's coming out of that person's mouth, right? And then, once again, non-verbal cues are a good way to engage others. So, using non-verbal cues to communicate interest in others, right? And then 5 steps for making successful small talk. Kind of goes along with those verbal cues there. Maybe just, indicate to that person that you are willing to talk to them. So what's a good way to talk to a stranger? And then, what about this weather? Or, weather's a big one we always go to, right? Or maybe you're in the grocery store and it's kind of like, oh, the price on the spare ribs is good today. Just little things to be like, oh, I'm all right. I can chit-chat for a few moments about something, right? Introduce yourself. That's usually a good way to have successful small talk. I guess I'm bad at it. I don't really always think about I don't always tell people what my name is when I engage in small talk, right? But I guess that's just a way to make it more personal, make well, I'm Cora and you're so-and-so. Well, hi. Nice to meet you, Once again, talk about stuff that you can relate to, and that usually comes in, in that indication. Whatever that opening sentence is that person says to you, you're going to know in that instance if that person wants to engage you or if you want to engage that person. Because, if you're walking around in the grocery store and someone says something just, totally off the wall, you're more than likely not going to be open to that conversation, right? So once again, know the context, be aware of your surroundings and the context of what's going on. And then if you do feel like having that small talk, because there's nothing wrong with chit-chatting with people every now and again, right, guys? You have to respond, so keep the ball rolling and then make a smooth exit. I think that's the best one. So know long enough, know that it's a short, meaningful engagement, and make that smooth. That, well, okay, nice talking to you, I can finish shopping now, Alright, and so when it comes to, language is important for those social and emotional functions, because once again, we need each other to survive. And so, for our mental health, our psychological health, our spiritual health, we have to be able to share ourselves with other people and share information about ourselves. So that is self-disclosure. That is sharing stuff about yourself and about your life with another person. And we know that self-disclosure is a good thing. It helps us, build relationships with friends and co-workers. It helps us in those intimate, romantic relationships. It helps us, feel emotionally closer to somebody else because we have that compassion, that empathy, right? And we also know that by sharing our problems, sharing what's on our mind, troubling us, that that plays a key role in having a good sense of well-being and a kind of a good sense of mental health and well-being. And that's a big part of Freud and psychoanalysis, which is basically just talk therapy. And you can go talk to your friends about a problem, and you may get some advice. Talk to your family. You may get some helpful advice in that. But the way that a therapist is different is that the therapist is that unbiased, impartial source there. So they're objective. So when you go and share with a therapist, they can give you more. They can give you new insight into your problems because they're not right there in the middle of it. They help you see it in different ways, and that does tend to help more than just going and asking your friends who have a little bias in their minds already, right? And then as much as we need self-disclosure and we have to share with each other to create those connections and to help society function, that's not always the case. Once again, guys, know your audience, know your situation, be aware of what's going on, because there are just some things that's not going to help you out if you're in public sharing. If you're in the grocery store and start telling somebody about, I don't know, say you have some kind of gastrointestinal disorder, nobody wants to hear that. Or if you're just in the grocery store shopping for eggs and someone wants to start talking about being sexually abused or something, what I'm saying, guys? It's just, know when it's appropriate to share. And it just all comes down to that idea of awareness. That's why we have consciousness, is so that we're not just aware of what goes on in here, we're aware of what's going on around us, because it all works together, right, guys? And just a few more things on disclosure there. We know that, it helps those emotional connections of closeness, but sometimes we say factual disclosures do not. So, just what I said, know your audience, know what you're sharing, because there is such thing as sharing too much or sharing inappropriate information at the wrong time. And then basically, as we first get into relationships, with self-disclosure is usually right there at the beginning, or at least it should be. If you don't lay all your cards out on the table for somebody in the beginning and you feel the need to hide, that's probably an indication of running the other way, right, guys? So, when we first get into those relationships, especially intimate relationships, right, and we're developing them, we want that connection, we want that openness. Like I said, we need that anatomy. You know, we want to be individuals, we want to be acknowledged as individuals, but once again, you know, in order to move forward in those positive and productive ways, if you really want to work with somebody, then you kind of, like I said, you have to put all your cards out there on the table. And sometimes, you know, like I said, you know, it's not always a good thing, because if, you know, there's something that can, you know, sometimes too much disclosure can cause a relationship to go wrong ways. Sometimes, though, it's a good thing, because, you know, you might find out something that you don't necessarily agree with, and, you know, your journey, and as far as that part of life goes, is over, and you need to move on, you know. So, once again, no, it's all about balance and being aware and balancing out what's going on. And we say that when it comes to genders, that a lot of times we see disparity in self-disclosure, and it's mostly due to social constructs. So in the United States, we say that women tend to self-disclose more than men. And then we say that, once again, that has to do with socialization. And I believe that that's a fallacy, too. Men talk to each other and talk about things that go on in their life just as much as women do. Men, I think it's context. Once again, you know, the way men may talk about problems in their life to each other is different from the way women talk about it. And then even in that, guys, you know, we can't say that every man and every woman falls into those categories, right? It's going to vary based on individuals there. All right, and then, like I said, when it truly comes down to being effective and positive and productive communicators, it all comes down to listening. So, you know, listening, it's that mindful activity. It's a complex process, because we have to select information. We have to be able to organize, interpret, and respond to that. And, you know, at the same time, remember what someone is saying to us. And, you know, in a conversation, those things go very rapidly, right? And so, once again, just being aware, you know, being mindful. That's really another good way of saying it. You know, focus your attention on that person. Focus your attention on the situation, and you will find that the way you communicate with others does change in different ways. And for the most part, it is more positive and productive ways, all right? So good listening involves signaling your interest in the speaker. We know that. Listening, actually hearing and listening to what the other person says, not interrupting, not tuning out, not thinking about what you're going to say. So you want to pay attention, process that information. You want to, you know, ask for clarification, paraphrase, you know, ask, you know, say it back to them so that you know you've understood it, and then pay attention, all right? So when it comes to communicating and listening, and this idea that listening is the biggest part of it, we also say that it's a contemplative process, which, you know, contemplative is another way to say mindful. It's something that we have to focus on and give our attention to. So the three prongs are basically what I've already told you. These ideas of deep listening, truly hearing what somebody's saying, truly speaking from your heart, and then, you know, figuring out how to use that information in your life. So the three prongs are deep listening, contemplating, and integrating. So when you listen, truly listening to what's being said, then you absorb that information, you contemplate it, and then after you contemplate it, what do? You integrate that into your own life, right? Well, sometimes it's the integration process to where we run into conflicts, because when we have a conversation with others, sometimes we have negative things, skeptical things, you know, things come up that create those strong emotional responses in us, right? Those things that they're kind of our hooks. And you know what it is, guys. Somebody's talking about something, and they say that word, or they talk about that one topic that you just makes your blood boil and you know, just pisses you off, and you can feel it in your body. You feel maybe the hairs on the back of your neck start to stand up. You feel the volcano bubbling up, and you get that like kind of feeling, you know. that Shimpa, that's your hook, because that is that emotion, because once that emotion hooks you, then you're there, right? You are in that just kind of mood, and what happens then? You're not listening. So basically, Shimpa, it is hard to describe, but like I said, we all know what it is. It's that body sensation that comes along with that emotion, and it's usually, once again, on the more conflictual, kind of negative side of the spectrum there. And we all do it. It happens to every one of us, and that's okay, because once again, we're all human. Life is a learning and growing process, and that's why we get education, so we can kind of learn how to navigate that, navigate life, transverse life, in those more positive and productive ways. So basically, when you feel that Shimpa coming up, there are 4 things that we can do. We want to recognize it, refrain, relax, and resolve with it, okay? Oh, hold on. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, well, I can move on now. So basically, when we're able to work with those 3 prajnas, so that deep listening, contemplating, integration, and then when we know what those hooks are that get us, and we learn to recognize them, refrain from repeating those, relax with those, and then resolve them. It's all about just knowing, knowing what is that thing that hooks you, that you're going to have that really just negative response to, that is just going to do nobody no good. It's just going to make you feel worse. Knowing what that is the first step. All right, and once you have it, you know what it is, you know what's going to set it off, then you try to find ways to work with that, because think about having an argument with your intimate partner, with your mate. We don't want to fight with each other. You love the person you're with. You're in life to be together and to work with each other, but you know what your hooks are. You know what if you've been together long enough, you know what hooks each other. And so you just have to kind of just take that deep breath and say to yourself, okay, I know that hooks me, but I love my husband, so I'm not going to go there anymore, right? And does that mean that we're perfect and that every time it comes up, we're like, oh, there's my Shimpa again, let me refrain from it? Oh gosh, no, guys. It will get us every now and again. The stars are aligned right, your Shimpa will take over. And then what happens? You feel bad afterwards. That's okay. That's all part of the process. We're all only human. We all make mistakes, and we're all, learning and growing and trying to do the best we can. The point of it is that, no, you're not always going to stop it, but the more that you can work to work with your Shimpa, to know what it is, then, the less negativity and conflict you do have in your life. And like I said, it will still hook you, but the more you realize it, the more you're aware and mindful of what's going on, the more you can change your interactions with others into more beneficial things that serve you and help you along your path of self-actualization there. And then, by working with our Shimpa, working with those 3 prajnas there, we are making ourselves better listeners, better thinkers, better communicators, and then better agents of positive social change. All right, guys, so now wrapping up, what I want to do here is kind of take a little evolutionary psychology, kind of archaeological, anthropological look at evolution, and look at language and language evolution. Sorry, a little Freudian slip there, huh? So, when and how language evolved is kind of debatable. We have theories, we have ideas, we have records of some of the earliest forms of writing, things like petroglyphs, hieroglyphs, pictographs. We have the Sumerian tablets. Those are what we actually consider some of the earliest, the first earliest forms of writings. But we have pictographs and hieroglyphs and pictographs that go back way thousands of more years beyond them. language doesn't fossilize, so since it doesn't fossilize, we don't know. We can't find it in our bones. We can't really find it in our DNA per se, to put that beginning. And then even with archaeological evidence, like I said, a lot of those really earliest forms of writings to where we had that are just like pictographs, where they were just drawing pictures on cave walls or on sides of mountains. Who knows how many of those may still be out there that are buried under sand? Who knows how many have been, buried under, say, like from flooding, or just how many of those have kind of eroded away for us to actually, do carbon dating and get a pinpoint on just when it actually started. But we know that in order for people to write it down, they had to have learned to speak first, right? You had to be able to say, this symbol here represents this sound that's coming out of our mouths, and then, you have to be able to speak before you can read it, right? Because you have to be able to speak it, write it down, and then translate it to somebody. So we do think that, speech came before our ability to actually produce language as far as written with our hands, right? And we have many different languages around the world. Since at least the beginning of contact, we say, Wade Davis is a cultural anthropologist. He says that 2,000 to 3,000 languages are lost like every year because of globalization and just modernization. And you have to think about it, that a lot of that has to do with those dialectical differences, those little variations, just because somebody lives in say there, Southern Africa, somebody lives down in the Congo, one tribe that lives here, they're gonna enunciate things a little bit differently from the other one. So that's how we could say that so many languages are being lost, and also why so many languages exist. However, we seem to say that all languages derive from one photo-language. So it's a little bit of diffusion here. So language started somewhere and then diffused out to the rest of the human species there. And so that proto-language, we think, is a pre-language, and so that's the theory that we use to base all existing languages on, okay? Now, there's a problem with this idea of a pre-language there, okay? So we say that we think that the first proto-language or the closest semblance of a proto-language, a pre-language that we have, comes from the Kusan culture. Now, we know that in the continent of Africa, or where some of the oldest human remains have been found. That is why we call it the cradle of civilization, the birth of life, right? A lot of early humanoid activity on that continent there. And so, we evolved in the African plains and jungles there. We learned to walk upright. We moved out onto the savannas, and then we spread out onto the rest of the world. So because of that, we say that African cultures must have the oldest languages because they are direct descendants of those first human beings, right? And so specifically, we have the Kusan language, the Kosian language, and the San, or maybe you know them as the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, that cultural group in Africa, they use this language, and basically they have clicks for phonemes, okay? I'm going to butcher it, and I don't know how to speak it, but you guys know the language I'm talking about. It's that one where people there, like they kind of talk like that, but those clicks actually mean something. Remember, think about what phone means more. Those click, we call them click consonants. They replace those phonemes there. And what's interesting is that they're in southern Africa with these oldest cultures that we have that speak this language. They're kind of unique because we don't see it in other parts of the world. There's one exception to that rule, and it is a culture in, I'm pretty sure it's Southwest Asia. So it's a little island culture in Southwest Asia, and they happen to develop this click consonant too. So it's interesting. We looked at DNA to see how closely they relate to those African cultures, and I can't remember what the result of that was, but interesting stuff there. However, this sounds good. It sounds like, you think about babies start to speak, they kind of babble, and it sounds kind of nonsensical, and so we kind of look at these Kosian languages and kind of say, oh, well, that's very primitive, very basic, kind of babbling like babies, which, of course it's not. That's kind of ethnocentric, and once again, that's a prejudice associated with language and speaking. But they are unique because they do have these click consonants. And now the problem with this is that we can't necessarily say that all languages started that way. And really, what we can say, though, is that the Kosian language, it's definitely unique in its structure. Alright, so next we have 4 models of language evolution, and we'll wrap it up here with these 4 models. And basically, these models go along with human evolution, okay? So our first one is the Calvin throwing model. And basically with the Calvin throwing model, he says that, Calvin said that it was a way for hunting parties, scouting parties to kind of avoid predators. So we thought that, it started out they would throw rocks to scare the predators away, or, to scare the predators away from them, or say, to get meat that, say, maybe a lion just killed a gazelle and you're hungry and you want to go get that gazelle. So they throw rocks, scare it away, go get that gazelle carcass. And so, being able to throw then, they're once again fine motor skills with our hands and our mouth here. So then by being able to throw, the better they got at throwing those rocks and hitting those animals, then the sound got associated with it. Throw a rock, make a noise, it's going to scare the animal a little bit more, right? And I think from observation of other animals, especially other non-human primates, monkeys, especially the lower simians, they make a lot of vocalizations to scare predators away. So we kind of, and they'll throw stuff too. So we think that just, once again, throwing association with somehow those hand motor skills get associated with the mouth, and we use our hands, and then that makes sound. And so then the better we got at that, and the more our brains evolved and we got more intelligent, then those sounds, then they actually started to form words pretty much, or we started to give meaning to them, I guess is another way to say that. Alright, and then next we have Dunbar's replacement model. And basically with Dunbar, he says that language developed as social bonding. So when we look around at our primate ancestors, our primate cousins there, we see that social bonding is a big part of how non-human primates, and even us, form relationships with each other. So for groups like chimpanzees, they groom each other as a forms of social bonding, okay? So what Dunbar said here is that in order to create greater networks bonds with people, this is where language started to develop, because you could sit over here and you can groom this person, brush this person's hair, but you don't have to just talk to that person. You're not just focused on that person, Now you can speak, so you have the ability to brush Susie's hair and interact with Tommy, whatever. You know what I'm saying, guys? So if you think about it, think of places like beauty shops and barber shops where, back in the day, those were the places people would go to socialize, and they would go to kind of gossip and just, talk and socialize with each other. And we see that bonding taking place. You have the barber, he's standing there cutting somebody else's hair, but everybody can be engaged in that conversation, right? So that's what Dunbar is talking about there. And basically what that does is that helps make that group bond stronger, because once again, you're not focused on just one-on-one relationships all the time. You're able to widen that and include everybody, so then everybody feels like they're part of the group there. Next we have Deacon, symbol, and sex model. And so basically with this one, Deacon's saying that it started as a social contract. And it was kind of a way to keep people from stealing mates, right? So we know that, early in human evolution, hunting was a big part of our survival. Usually, typically we say, the strongest hunters, they had the best genes, so they were more desirable to the females. And we have a lot of models that suggest, how we came about with things like sex taboos and just mating practices in generals of who we can and can't have sex with are based on some of these early groups and these ideas of the strongest hunter would get all the women and then everybody else had to kind of fight when he wasn't looking, kind of like you see in animal packs, especially in primates. So the gorilla turns or the head chimp turns his head, and the younger chimps are why that head chimp is fighting with somebody else who wants to be the head chimp. Then all the little secondary chimps come in and they're the ones mating with the women because they're distracted. So that's kind of what Deacon is thinking about here with his sex and with his symbols and sex model. And so basically, this contract was to express that sexual exclusivity. Think about it, being able to, point and say mine is an effective way of letting somebody know that is indeed your mate, your partner. Stay away. That's a lot more effective than maybe throwing rocks or, like I said, fighting with them. So then everybody else, so while you're fighting, everybody else is like, oh, you didn't tell me. You see what I'm saying, guys? So when you say mine, no matter who's fighting with you, nobody else is going to run over there. You see what I'm saying? And so, so it's really, so that's where we really see language getting that symbolic association too, and then that being translated to where the group understood. All right, and then our last model of English level evolution, we'll see some similarities here from these other models. So it's Corbalis's gesture and spoken language. And it's basically just that we gestured first, so we made hand movements first, and then by watching vocalization in other animals, say like primates, monkeys, and birds, that we started once again associating those gestures with spoken words, and we say that we gesture for various reasons, because we're bipedal, we stand upright, that leaves our hands open for communication. So it could be like an early form of sign language, and then, like I said, it just eventually then led into words being associated with those gestures. And then we say maybe over time we got lazy and just stopped using our hands and just used our voices for those words, right? And so basically, all these theories give us good ideas to think about how and why language started, but there's really no concrete proof for any of them. We have found evidence that Neanderthal shares a specific language DNA to us modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, so that leads us to believe that Neanderthals could actually speak and had a language, and based on that, then and we're trying to look even farther into our human prehistory and look back into those different groups, so like Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecines, all those different groups of humanoids we've had, and trying to, kind of look in that DNA and figure out exactly when language started. I can't specifically, there's another group too, I don't know if it's the Australopithecines that we found some evidence of like vocal stuff for, but lots of interesting stuff going on archaeologically when we look into what it means to being human. And as we continue to understand our past, we will learn more about what it means to be human, and maybe eventually we will unlock the mystery of how language started. And that wraps up our lecture for this time, guys. Maybe. All right, there we go. That wraps up our lecture, guys. Thanks as always.